Well, good evening. It is good to see everyone out this evening. I encourage you to open your Bibles to 1 Peter chapter 3. That's where we'll be at. Supposed to have been chapter 3, verses 8 and 9. No big deal. It's still God's word, and we still need to hear it. But we're in chapter 3 this evening. Good to see everyone out that is out this evening. Again, we have many who are traveling, and we do have many who are homesick. Bob said to let everyone know that they send their love and to everyone that they wish they could be here, but they just don't feel up to being out quite yet. I think he's kind of wiped out with his current illness. So pray that he is able to be back here with us very, very soon, and that you all can have him back in the pulpit in a very expedited fashion. Then 1 Peter chapter 3, and we're skipping across chapter 2 and do this. I'm doing this intentionally because we'll back to chapters 2 and 4 in the future. We'll come back to those. We're doing the odd chapters today, do the even chapters another day. So in chapter 3, this morning was a holy calling, what I entitled it, but this evening in chapter 3, take a look at it as a blessed calling, that we're blessed to be called God's children. And when we read 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 8 and 9, it says, "Finally, all of you be of one mind, having compassion for one another. Love as brothers, be tender-hearted, be courteous, not returning evil for evil, nor reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, blessing, knowing that you were called to this, that you may inherit a blessing." I want us to think about this. He starts this off, he says, finally be of one mind. Now, when we think of being of one mind, we stop first and think about what is associated with this. So many things in this life are great, they're honorable to be associated with, it's a good thing to be a part of. And so many people will ask, well, isn't being a Christian restrictive? Isn't being a Christian a boring life? No. And they'll say, well, you can't do the A, B, C, all the way down. They can list you more things than there are letters in the alphabet of things that they consider to be restrictive that we don't do. But when you think of those things, and the first things I think of are things I mentioned this morning. We don't partake in becoming drunken or intoxicated with alcohol or illicit drugs. We don't partake in being in promiscuous situations. We wait until we're married and faithful to our spouses, something that society has seemingly thrown to the wind. Christianity truly is a fulfilling life. People say, how is it fulfilling? Because if you are able to restrain yourself, if you're able to contain yourself, save yourself for marriage, for the physical relationship, for the spiritual relationship, with the psychological relationship with your spouse, you have this connection with them that you can have with nobody else. You form that bond with them from your honeymoon on. And it's a beautiful thing. And somebody who says, oh, it's not, there's something wrong. Marriage is a blessing. There are too many in this life who know how great a blessing they had because the spouse may be gone due to age or illness or whatever the case may be. They realize how great it was. They knew how great it was while the spouse was here. They say you don't know how great of a thing you have until you lose it. Well, Christianity is one of those things that I don't want to find out how great it was because I lost it. I want to have Christianity is one of those things I want to know how great it was because, like I said this morning, when I step into eternity, I want to be home. I want to have finally made it home. So let's take a look at what Peter says about the Christian life, the attributes of it, and how we can be here. And as I started to say a few moments ago, he says, all of you be of one mind. Be of one mind is for everyone to be teaching, to be believing the same thing. That's a common theme throughout any organization. Whether it's here at church, whether it's a school system or the workplace, or whatever you may be involved in, everyone believes the same way. You don't go out here to a football game and everybody have their own set of rules. Be chaos on the field. We don't go out here on 81 and I can do donuts in my car all the way down 81, and the next person think that they can drag race, and the next person think they can do 20 mile an hour, and everybody do their own thing. It's not how it works, is it? No. We all have to be of the same mind. We're all on the same wavelength. We all know what we're doing. We're paying attention. We have an idea of where we're all going. Christianity is the same way. Think about what's happening in our nation and our society currently. Everyone wants to do their own thing. What's happening? And don't answer this out loud. Though I see someone over here in the pews wanting to give me an answer. Think about this. Society's gone bad. Everyone has their own idea of what society and culture ought to be. And you turn the news on and it's depressing. Because everyone wants to do their own thing. They go out and this group, they want to be over here and they don't want these laws to apply to them. But they want a set of rules to apply to this group. It's not how it operates. A set of laws that are in place for all of us to run by here in this life. And the same thing applies to our lives spiritually. Think back to the 1500s. Martin Luther saw that in the religious realm that there was mass confusion. He made his thesis of 99 things that he said was horribly wrong. He took them up and he nailed them to a door. Now, the error that came of that I don't agree with, the false teaching, but I have to admire him for saying, hey, here are 99 things that are wrong. And I'm going to make it known publicly that these are wrong. Who in our society today, 21st century America, who would have anybody in this room or anybody watching online, do you have the nerve to make up a list of the things that are religiously wrong and go out and post them publicly and sign your name to it? You know what? Every day that we go out and we proclaim Jesus Christ and we sit down with someone in our own way, we're doing that. We're telling them, this is what's wrong. Me standing here this evening proclaiming God's word is being live streamed. If there's someone who's watching who doesn't believe in the Bible and wants to see what we're teaching, guess what? I'm presenting the things to them that is wrong in their life that they need to correct. Living a faithful Christian life, it's a good attribute. We have one mind, to be sober-minded. Think about this. The following passages have the phrase one mind that appears and has the same contextual meaning as what we're talking about. Romans chapter 15, verse 6. 2 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11. Now, we're not going to look at all these. I'm just going to name a few of them. Philippians chapter 1 and verse 27. And Philippians chapter 2 and verse 2. And then you can go over to Revelation chapter 17, verses 13 and 17. Each one of these passages uses the phrase of one mind in the same context as what we're looking at here. One mind. We're the same belief. We believe in the same God, the same set of attributes that applies to all of our lives. People want to say, well, the rules to run by. Are they really rules? Well, you could call them rules. They're attributes that we're to incorporate into our lives. They're attributes that we are to, characteristics that we're to have. That when the world looks at us, they say, that person is a child of God. They're not of the world. That's how we're to be living. Now, secondly, we take a look in this passage, and he says, have compassion for one another. First, let's look at what the word compassion means. Webster defines compassion as a sympathetic, conscious of others' distress together with a desire to alleviate it. A sympathetic consciousness of others' distress with a desire to alleviate the distress. When you look out into the world, do you have compassion on those who misunderstand the gospel of Jesus Christ, the good news that has been delivered to us? I do. I want to help them to alleviate the distress that's in their life spiritually. I have a desire to help them to come to a better understanding of what they need to do, of how they need to live, and help them to come to be of the same mind, not as I am, but of what the Lord wants us to be. It's not what Jonathan says we need to be thinking. I picked this book up. This is where I find what we need to be believing. Double check me. Double check Bob, but double check any man who stands in front of you and says something from the Word of God. Pick your Bible up and double check it. Because guess what? Bob, myself, or any other man who stands and teaches a Bible class or preaches a sermon is a human just like you are. And there's a chance we could accidentally give you a wrong passage or accidentally misrepresent something, unintentionally do it. And if you hear us do it, let us know afterwards so we can make the correction. We're all on this path together to make sure that we're all believing, and that's having compassion. Compassion encompasses a lot of things. Think about James chapter 1, verse 27. James, in the last half of that verse, he says to visit orphans and widows in their trouble and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. The word compassion is not used directly in that verse, but think about this. What are widows? Widows are females who have lost their husband. Widowers are men who have lost their wives. We're to be visiting them because they have lost half of their life. Think about this. They just didn't lose a portion of their life. They didn't lose someone. They have lost half of themselves because what happened on the day that they got married? They didn't stand before just a church building or a gathering of people and make vows to each other. They stood before the throne of the Almighty, vowed their lives together to become one. God brought them together as a unit at that point. And when one passes, half that person essentially has disappeared. I haven't been married that long, but I can't imagine if something happened to my wife. I'd be lost in more ways than you'd ever imagine. And I'm still fairly young. I want to tell you something. My grandmother died December 20th of 2019. My grandparents have been married for 66 years. My grandfather passed away April the 10th of this year. That man died of a broken heart. If you don't believe me, come see me afterwards. I can tell you story after story of time after time that man would look at me and my family and say, I just want to go back and be with Mom. I just want to be with her. He was 91 years old. 66 years with her. He had lost the love of his life. He had lost half of himself. We need to learn to be compassionate. And then he goes on to talk about orphans. Think about orphans. I think about Evie over here, Annabelle back in the back this evening, and all the other little babies that are in the congregation. We've got a lot of them right now. That's a blessing. But I think about these little guys, their babies these ages, have no parents and no family. They're orphans. I can't imagine what it'd be like to have no family. Can't even imagine. And you know what? For someone who's outside of Christ, you've orphaned yourself. You've made yourself an orphan, willingly, spiritually speaking, because you don't have a father in your life the way you ought to. There's no reason to be an orphan physically. There's no reason to be an orphan spiritually. Love as brothers and be tenderhearted. This requires us to treat each other as family. Yeah, it can be difficult at times. There can be someone sitting in the pew next to you, you think, I don't know if I could get along with him too well. Have you taken the time to try to get to know him? Maybe someone that you think, I just don't know if I could ever get to know that person. Take a step out of the comfort zone. Step outside the box. You might be surprised. You might be surprised. I have. I've been shocked in my lifetime. See people and think, I could never be friends with that person. They're standoffish. They've got a doctor's degree, whatever the case may be. They got an education way higher than mine. They're in a different pay grade, whatever. Lay all that aside. Because when we come through these doors, when we come together as God's family, education doesn't matter. Pay grade doesn't matter. Where you live doesn't matter. Your family background doesn't matter. Why not? Because we're all God's family. We're all God's family. We're to love as brothers. We're to love as brothers. This morning, think about the song in the song books. It talks about God's family. We're part of a family that's been born again. Part of a family whose love knows no end. It says, for Jesus has saved us and made us his own. Now we're part of a family. Now wait a minute, hold on for this. That's on its way home. I can't emphasize that enough. We're on our way home. And in order to be there, we have to raise ourselves up to the standard God expects us to live at. We can't be reaching up here anymore. We have to stop this bunch of stuff of reaching up and saying, God, come down here to me. Come back here, God. Come down. No, it's not how it works. We raise ourselves to God's standard. We have quite a few that are members in this congregation who've served and currently serving in the military. When commanding officers, historically speaking, would take a standard and set it on the battlefield, troops didn't say, hey, bring that standard back here to us so it's a little easier. No, those troops knew their orders. Where was the standard set? It was set high. The troops backed down? No. They rose to the occasion. As God's children, as God's army, as the VBS song says, we're part of the Lord's army. We truly are. We have to go to that standard. We don't bring it back to us. We have to learn to be tender-hearted. We have to learn how to help each other to overcome our own personal obstacles that we see one another having. If you ever get to know anyone who served in the military, you talk to them, you find out they have the motto, no man left behind. They're a band of brothers. And they truly are tender-hearted to each other. They won't leave anyone behind. They help each other to ensure that that front is held solid, that it is fortified, and is put where it needs to be. And to be courteous. It seems very simple, doesn't it? To be courteous to one another. But this can be the most challenging, even for the most faithful, to be courteous to others. as I said, there may be somebody that you may not have gotten along with in the past. Let those things go. You know, they say that, guests and fish stink after 3 days. Well, we have to get beyond that in our spiritual life. Yeah, people may get on our nerves occasionally. That's human instinct. That's human to get on, for something to happen. But on the higher plane of living, godly, we don't get on each other's nerves. We are there to ensure that we make it through this life. And in verse 9, in the first part of it, he says, not returning evil for evil. This one should be self-explanatory, and we're to love our brothers as ourselves, which is the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Seems fairly simple. Some passages, for those who are taking notes, that you can look at for this, examples of this, it's Matthew chapter 19, verse 19. Mark chapter 12, verse 31. Romans 13:9. Galatians 5:14. And there are numerous others. Those are just a few I want to put out there. When we look at those, loving others as ourselves. Human instinct is, have you ever thought about this? Someone does something to you, and you think, oh, you get aggravated, and you may get upset with them, and then it may be days and weeks or even years later, something happens to them, and you say, they had what was coming to them. Is that really the right attitude to have? Is that the attitude we ought to have, is they had what was coming? No. Because sometimes what happened to them is tragic. Now, for somebody to step into eternity, spiritually speaking, the Lord can look at that and say, you had what was coming. You knew better. Because on the day of judgment, what's he going to do for those standing on his left hand? Depart from me, you who work lawlessness. I never knew you. Terrifying words. The next thing is reviling with reviling. We need to remember what James says in James chapter 3 about the tongue. It's described as fire, a world of iniquity, and what does it do? It defiles the whole body. We have to be careful what our mouths say, because what does the mouth reveal? A lot of times, what's actually written on the heart. If there's anger and malice and reviling spewing out of the mouth continually, it's written in your heart somewhere. You have a heart problem. It's just not a mouth problem. You need to correct what's in the heart. Not the physical heart, in the spirit and the soul. And then he finishes this whole thing off with the last part of the verse. He says, but on the contrary, blessing, knowing that you were called to this, that you may inherit a blessing. But on the contrary, blessing. Bless people. You say, how can you bless people? I've heard this when I was a child. I heard adults say, no one can bless anyone except for God. Well, in the spiritual sense, yes. Only God can bless. But how can we bless one another? How can we bless each other as Christians? Someone's sick, take a meal to them. Someone's sick, go check on them. Someone's sick, offer to help them out with their lawn work or shovel snow. If they're elderly, go check on them. Anything that you do to help them out physically, it's a blessing to you. Knowing that you have a compassionate heart, knowing that you have enough love for them to go to them and say, can I help you out with whatever it is blessing them. It's a blessing to them. Even as young as I am, I've experienced it. Members of the Lord's church helping Ashley and I out when we may be sick or something, it's a huge blessing to know that we have Christian brethren who are caring about us and are checking on us and willing to do what is needed to ensure that we are taken care of both physically and spiritually. And in the inherit a blessing, it says that you may inherit a blessing. What is the inherited blessing? Well, it may be something that's returned favorable to you. But I like to think that it goes all the way back to John chapter 14, where Jesus talks about going to prepare a place for us. And what Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 3 through 12. We're going to heaven. It all goes back, and it fits. The Bible harmonizes so beautifully. We're going home. Question. Right this very moment, you as a soul, are you able to call God Father in the true biblical sense? Or are you spiritually an orphan? Do you need to come back home? Do you need to come home initially and call him Father initially? Or have somewhere along the line you orphaned yourself back away from him? Like prodigal son coming home. He won't turn you away. I know there are many people who say, well, if I walk into a church building, lightning would strike it. No, it won't. Because of Saul, we called to be converted to know we knew as the Apostle Paul, and he considered him the chiefest the chiefest of sinners. Doesn't matter how vile the things we've done in this life, the Lord's willing to forgive us. Doesn't matter what age you are, whether you just come to the age where you're understanding I'm living in sin, or if you're at that point in life where you're saying, you know what, I'm in life's winter. I'm in the last season of my life. I've never known God, but I need to know him today. There's no better time than now to come back home. I know those who are gathered here this evening will be more than happy to spend the few fleeting moments it takes for you to be buried in the water grave of baptism, or to pray with you and pray for you, whichever the case may be. The front pews are open. The time is now. Come, why don't we stand and sing?